the data analytics, business intelligence teams. I think I would previously go and just say, I need this report with these columns, but I think in terms of what and how to communicate relative to needs with data really shifted, equating to kind of learning a new language, right? So you're communicating with someone in a language that's not your first language, the same way that I think business leaders need to be able to kind of communicate with technical and data leaders in a different language.
Welcome to Data Chatter Season 2. Today we are talking to Liz Gebhard, who after a decade of leadership experience at Amazon is now the interim transformation officer at the World of Books. Liz has had a fairly storied experience with data, working from both sides, both as an analyst and as a business person who has got hands-on with data through her work with Amazon. So Liz, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Karthik. Great to be here.
So to start off with, Liz, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself in terms of your background, in terms of the roles that you have done, along with your relationship with data through the course of your career so far?
Yeah, sure. So I've spent the last 20 plus years in effectively kind of the intersection of digital retail and transformation. So I started my corporate career at Target, which is a major retailer in the US, starting from university with degrees that had nothing to do with what I ended up doing as first roles, but started out in supply chain, first in kind of an analyst and kind of inventory planning, inventory management role, and then quickly moved into a role helping build out supply chain technology for Target at the time, who was very new in the online space. This is dating myself, but early back in the early 2000s when online and multi-channel retail was an infant in that regard. And what the reason for that was when I jumped into my supply chain role, found some gaps in the systems through some deep dives via data. And they identified that instead of hiring someone else externally, they would just put me in the role to then build out this long-term future planning tools. So I helped build the purchase order and network planning strategy technology for Target.com at the time. Then from that role moved in to launch several businesses for Target, which really, again, came fundamentally down to a high degree of analytics and building out not just the selection and sourcing and business strategy, but also what technically, capability-wise, did we need, particularly in building and launching functions like pre-order, digital downloads. Again, all things that sound pretty common today, but were very new at the time. And after a few years in those roles, my last role at Target was in omni-channel store of the future planning. So I was representing digital in that experience. So what is things like ship to store, purchase in store, ship home kind of aspects look like across a really big retailer like that in the US. So after that, left and went to Amazon, first leading part of our physical books business. Amazon was a pretty significant step up in terms of analytics and data requirements. So I went from being supported by and working with really closely technical teams and analyst teams to suddenly myself having to learn SQL and really self-serving data in a very different way to really be successful there. So that culture really was a big shift in terms of just huge reliance on data-driven decision-making, data-backed arguments, and a lot of that coming from, you had some support, but a lot of it was self-service, really understanding the where ins and outs of how to build that analysis. So started my, I guess, masterclass in learning all those things in terms of relying on it as a business person, but also self-serving. Then moved over to the UK and I've been running I ran businesses here. I ran video games for a few years and then fashion, part of our fashion business here. And then my last few years, we moved into HR and diversity, equity, inclusion in tech, inclusion in AI, a lot of those kind of core topics. In particular, my time when I moved to the UK and building out businesses here, in particular in fashion, where hugely complex data sets, businesses that don't operate the same in a digital landscape and require a really significant amount of understanding, worked and built out our first business intelligence engineering organization within the business organization. So I was responsible for kind of building that business case, hiring the team, leading the first few rounds of that. And that was my first experience kind of leading analytics engineering in that regard, and really got closer to the work in that space, which I've always I didn't really know it when I was younger, but ended up having a real passion for data and understanding that, and that's actually led to some of the work that I do now. So I do a lot of consulting and supporting of building brands and businesses, and my current role as an interim executive, I'm supporting on a pretty big transformation project, leveraging really data at the center of that. So it's been an interesting and unexpected part of my journey, but certainly a thread throughout that's critically enabled a lot of the business decisions that I've been requested and kind of led to make.
Awesome. So I think broadly we can classify you uh, as a business person who has ended up building and leading data teams, among other things. I think I'll put you in that bucket. So from this perspective, can we start with talking about how you built your business intelligence team at Amazon? Because you were coming from the business side, you were a core business person. You had taught yourself SQL to be able to query the data at Amazon and become more hands on. And now you had to build this team. So, what kind of skills do you look for? Because if you think about it, these cross-functional teams that have to span business and data, at least in my personal experience, have been tricky to hire for. So, how did you manage to build this team?
First and foremost, I spent a lot of time with other leaders that had been that were running kind of really successful and really large scale business intelligence teams to really understand the core functions that we'd need to stand up to enable that. I think particularly business can sometimes misunderstand the real distinct roles of something like a data scientist versus an intelligence engineer versus an analyst. In that regard of how those roles kind of are critical, independent of each other, but how they interplay. I think my experience was a lot of business leaders really only interacted with like an analyst layer, so they didn't understand the deeper layers behind the scenes of how you needed to build out a structure to kind of create and truly engineer data to help you solve the business problems versus just pulling queries and having it all work beautifully. Like it definitely needed that structure. So spent a lot of time learning and understanding that. And then really from an internal perspective, started doing a mix of internal and external recruiting for a mixture of those roles. So understanding what mix of roles we needed for database engineering, data architecture, analysts and BIE kind of engineers in that regard. So, and then within that, also brought in some people that were experts in technical interviewing skills so that I could make sure that the candidates we were bringing in were tested at the right technical bar. Because as a business leader, it's really important that you have representation from the technical teams in those loops because you can analyze, you can evaluate them from a different lens of skills. But you need to make sure you've got a good balance of technical people in the process as well so that you have the right evaluation. So worked with them to kind of build a couple tests to kind of bring that through the process, but then ultimately made sure they were part of the interview loops as well. So that was really critical and ended up, we hired the team within relatively short span of time, about 3 months. We were able to fill the roles mostly internally. We had one come externally, but the majority were internal, which was great. And then brought on a leader as well that was experienced in all those things relative to the database engineering side as well. So kind of had a good mix in the team. And then it was really about establishing what is the mission and the vision of this team? How are people going to interact? So it was building out new things for the business to understand how to file, tickets to get in a queue, what the prioritization system was going to be, how we were going to, really kind of manage the day-to-day influx. Because as soon as you create a new access to data within an organization that's hungry for data, it's just you're inundated with requests. So making sure that the team had good structure and good mechanisms in place to help them be best successful in understanding what was the key parts of the business.
Got it. And related to that, you mentioned again that like you moved from being a completely business person who was being supported by analysts in your first role to becoming hands-on with data yourself. How has that changed your relationship with data teams after that? If you were to compare your relationship with data teams before you started writing your own SQL to the time when you actually started writing your SQL, how has your relationship changed?
Not in any way that I had, a different level of respect, but I think in terms of a much deeper understanding of what and how to communicate relative to needs with data really shifted. So I think I would previously go and just say, I need this report with these columns and this, and it kind of framing it more as here's a drawing of what I need, go fill in the columns, and that's what I need. And really kind of thinking differently about approaching the data analytics, business intelligence teams with helping me solve the problem. So kind of working with them on what the problem statement was, understanding and being able to communicate a lot more about what data I thought we had, but needing them to help me plug in gaps where we might not have the data, we might need to invent it. And also helping us think through efficiencies and how to build that in a way that's not drawing down on too much capability, or that it's really kind of building that in a way that's automated and really more focused on kind of long-term solutions versus just a tactical kind of transactional, like I need this report, get me this report kind of perspective. So really understanding the background of what it took to do it. And also I think just a lot more confidence in being able to kind of speak and understand the technical aspects behind the scenes. So by no means did I declare myself an expert, but I felt at least more informed, almost equating to kind of learning a new language, right? So you're communicating with someone in a language that's not your first language, the same way that I think business leaders need to be able to kind of communicate with technical and data leaders in a different language. So, having a bit more of a shorthand, spending more time with them, and ultimately learning more about them as people, the business teams, like what was happening behind the scenes. And that ended up paying off in a big way because I got brought into the fold a lot more, but I was also able to better understand how and where to leverage them in the best way versus just sort of automatically going and having this kind of transactional relationship.
Got it. And I think, Liz, through your career, you would have interacted with lots of different data science, data analyst teams across your various jobs. And certain that some of those teams would have kept you happier than the others. You would have found it better. You would have kind of found it better to interact with some of those teams, get work done from them, than with and support them compared to some of the other teams. So, in your experience as a business person who has worked closely with data teams, what is it about data teams that make it sort of a pleasure for you to work with them versus be wanting to be transactional or like, I need to work with these guys, so just give me the data and move on, kind of a thing.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I think inherently feeling part of the organization is key. So a lot of times, particularly in functions like finance, data, HR, there can kind of be this service related relationship of you're here to serve my needs, that perspective. And I personally, as a leader, don't feel like that creates a lot of long-term engagement and interest in the teams of like really wanting to stick around and help. So I think kind of getting really stuck in with creating opportunities for teams to interact with each other outside of kind of that day-to-day piece, but also giving them an opportunity to help solve the tough problems the business is trying to solve. So bringing them into conversations. And that means the leaders on the data analytics and data science teams have to be interested and engaged in the problems too. So I think having that kind of curiosity between teams is super important. I also think that creates a lot better solutions in the end. So it's not just about it feels better to go to work and you appreciate people more that you work with, but I think it creates more pace in delivery. It creates more creativity and more long-term solving because if the teams that are being requested to do something, in particular data science, data analytics, if they know the bigger problem sets, they might actually be able to help you solve something much faster than you thought because you went to them with an initial ask, but because they know what the ultimate need is, they may be able to go 3 layers down from that and come back with a more robust, more complete solution. So I think really engaging with the business problems, being stuck into that, I think is really important. And that comes from a mix of that curiosity and willingness to kind of get stuck in with the teams, but also from the business side, making sure that there's a real clear expectation of the importance and the criticality of those roles and that they are a constrained resource. So I think making sure there's really open communication, in particular between the leaders of the data engineering, data science teams and the business. I think often there's, again, that miss in sort of understanding really how much effort something is going to take, the capacity, the delivery, the timelines to expect that. So if it's really good communication and really clear, then it's great because everybody has a better understanding. But if it's sort of mixed communication, it's inconsistent, it's, we don't hear anything until it's done, that kind of thing makes it really tough for that relationship to progress beyond transactional because there's not a inherent kind of language you can understand or understanding the broader roadmap. So I think really open communication is really critical as well. hope that kind of leads collectively to everybody wanting to work together, but it doesn't always work that way. But generally, if you have a few of those things in place, it makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, so I think what you mentioned is about open sort of meeting halfway, where, for example, the business people need to know a little bit of data to be able to talk the data language, and the data people need to know, they need to have that basic curiosity of the business. They need to believe that they're solving business problems and not maths problems, and that kind of brings them closer to the business side and so on. Now, again, the question here is how do you hire for such people? Because what we see nowadays is some sort of hyper specialization in terms of if you look at the average data scientist role, how it's evolved in the last 10, 15 years. Like earlier, it used to be like, I mean, we had these jokes like a data scientist knows more statistics than a computer scientist and more computer science than a statistician and things like that, which meant it was a fundamentally cross functional role. But now it's gone into a sort of a okay, I like to do my models, you run your business, we will have a product manager who talks between us. So, how do you sort of hire for people who can sort of appreciate the other side? And also, maybe you can bring in your experience in running the DEI part of the Amazon as well into this in terms of, because I assume that having people from more diverse backgrounds in the teams can also help in terms of like helping this kind of better communication
Yeah.
and so on.
It's a great question and certainly a complex one. I think what's interesting is, there is kind of two different trends happening in general in the workforce related to what you just mentioned. So there's this, particularly the data science, data engineering kind of aspect is there's so many new requests and requirements coming from business that are further apart maybe from the core understanding of what we started with. So I think of generative AI as, this new piece that people don't really fundamentally understand what needs to be in place to support generative AI as a capability within an organization and the why behind it, et cetera. So there's these new specialty areas that are popping up and core specialty that needs to be in place kind of at the same time. So just like honestly, I appreciate it's happening on the data science, data engineering side. It's also happening on the business side. So business, you used to be able to be a specialist in just marketing or just supply chain or just something. And there's really this push to need to be both a generalist and a specialist in certain things to be able to make yourself unique, make yourself identifiable in the job market, which is really competitive and challenging right now. So I think relative to kind of your initial question about the data science, data engineering side of that, I do think it's important for people to be really crisp about their expertise in their areas and things that and have proven kind of deliverables in those things, but also have demonstrated abilities kind of outside of that as well. So I do think particularly if you're mid-career or that piece, you need to make sure that you do have more things in your toolkit to be able to have an organization best understand how to use you and how to deploy you. But earlier in your career, it's helpful to be really specialist because you can be really precise in the types of roles you're applying for. I also think organizations need to do a better job of being really precise in the job descriptions and what they need. I think what I've seen a lot is people write kind of a really generic job description. They start interviewing people that kind of changes what they think the job should be throughout the process. And then people who applied thinking that they were in that, pocket are suddenly out because it's, evolved throughout the process. So that does happen. But I think being precise on both sides is really helpful in that regard. And to your point about how I view diversity and equity inclusion playing into that. So I think the fundamental general approach for business is if you look at who your customers are and who you're ultimately serving, whether it's stakeholders, customers, the mix of those individuals, whether it's gender, ethnicity, those pieces, but really ultimately as well, educational background or specialty areas, all those components. If that's not represented in your teams, then you're not going to make the right business decisions. So, or you'll make them slower because you won't have representation in those seats to start with. So I think about something like when I was in fashion and, fashion, generally speaking, is 80% customer base is women, not just for themselves, but buying for the household. And generally, they're the kind of purse strings holder in most decisions. But the majority of our data science, data engineering teams were men. And that wasn't because we didn't try, but it was because there weren't enough women that had had opportunities to kind of take those senior roles and build that up. So that also ultimately ended up creating opportunities for me in my career to kind of find more ways to bring more people forward, because I was in so many situations where we really wanted to hire more people from different countries, different backgrounds, different skill sets, to your point. Like, I think diversity of skill sets is also critical, but also different socioeconomic, different gender backgrounds, et cetera. Because just the more people you have in the room, the faster and better decisions you make in that instance. So I do think it plays a critical role, and that doesn't just come in ultimately solving the business problem. But if you think about really being able to look around corners and the impact and the risk in data, not having diverse perspectives in the room is a big risk. So if you're building healthcare solutions, for example, and you're not critically auditing the data to realize that 90% of your data set is coming from Caucasian men in the US kind of piece, then you're at huge risk of kind of building the wrong product. So I think it is important, not just because of, being a good thing to do, but it does actually significantly help progress business and progress decision making, if you've got more diversity in the room, and just creates for better functional teams in that regard. So um, I think those are connected in a lot of ways, but going back to the question about how do you hire, I think you do have to make sure that you've got really big clarity on what are the critical needs in the role and what are the nice to haves, because I think people have a long list of critical things, but not necessarily the right list, in that sense.
Yeah, I think what I find is sometimes the critical list will be much longer than it needs to be in some sense. Like, and that sort of significantly narrows down the pool of candidates you can hire from. And I mean, I probably made that mistake multiple times as well. So
It is a big risk, especially if you are priority, like, if everything is a priority, then inherently nothing is a priority. So you can't make a trade-off or a decision, because there's no person that's a perfect checklist. And it also takes away your opportunity to develop people. So I think people that show potential that may not have had the experience yet, you miss out on that hunger, and that people that are really willing to kind of stick in and do work and learn. And you need a mix of those people on the team as well. So I think if you're waiting for someone that's done everything on the list, then that person might also be further in career and sort of not interested in the role ultimately, because maybe it's not, senior enough or not pushing them enough. So you have that balance too of, you have to make sure it's interesting to the candidate, not just meeting your check boxes too.
let's slightly change facts now. So I mean, everybody talks about Amazon being this Uber data-driven organization, which is very different from any other comparable business and so on. So, having been both at Amazon and worked with other businesses both before and now after that in your consulting career, like, what do you think sets Amazon apart in terms of the way they manage their data and use data for their decision making? And what is it that other companies can? I know there are like WBRs have become fashionable everywhere and things like that. But that apart, like, what else can companies do to sort of imitate the good parts of Amazon in terms of how they make decisions using data?
Yeah, I think so. A couple things that felt very different to me at Amazon is that the expectation of being able to communicate what you're seeing and trends and decisions you're backing, in data was spread through every role in the organization. So it's different to others where it's, maybe there's a specific part of the business that's really good at that. It's like the finance team speaks really well about numbers, and commercial teams maybe because they're talking about transactions and things like that. But it was kind of more pocketed in different ways. And the way other people communicated then was visual or through other means, and other kind of aspects of how you're kind of making decisions, like through PowerPoints and all that kind of stuff. And Amazon is just fundamentally focused on kind of working backwards from what the data is telling us. And if you are going to make an argument and have a different perspective than the group, you need data to back that up. It can't just be, I've been in a lot of rooms prior to Amazon. It's sort of like, a senior leader would say, well, I have a feeling this is the right thing, or I have a gut instinct, and that everyone would kind of run, not having any proof necessarily of what that is, because that was sort of like, well, they're senior, they must have different information than I do, therefore that must be right. Versus at Amazon, even like leaders needed to kind of probe with data-driven questions. They could certainly question what their view of was it, and how their data worked, but even to have a debate about something, you needed to statistically present both sides of the debate, make a recommendation, and then kind of have that be the discussion in the room. So that was one big way. And I think from a culture perspective, that reflected in almost every meeting was presented with a, they called it the white paper. So whether it was a 2-pager or 6-pager, anything, almost every one of those started with the page zero of data. The narrative supports the data, doesn't repeat the data. You know, you're not repeating what's in a little table. But it really kind of informs a lot of the decisions in a just a really different fundamental way. I think that's good in a lot of ways. I think there's also opportunity to keep upskilling and making sure people have the right opportunities to learn that, because it's a very fast curve there when you start. So it's a high bar to get in, but then it's a high bar kind of right away to kind of perform there. So there's some things there that they are continuing to work on to help people get there faster. The other way in terms of that, just kind of one other point related to the customer, the data there is they're focused on what the customer's impact in that is. So I think that's also a unique frame of data that I hadn't seen to that lens about how much data was presented kind of from a customer lens, which I think a lot of that, both using data and using customer voice, take away personalities or take away opinions and kind of that heated piece, because you're all looking at the same information. No one is, has extra information on the side that you don't know about to participate in the discussion. So it's almost like a democratization of data and information that everybody in the room is reading and using the same information to have the discussion. So I think that's culturally something that a lot of other organizations could learn from relative to making it accessible for people, helping them be supported in why data is so fundamental, and making sure everybody has the same information to help make decisions. Because I think in other organizations that I've seen, it's sort of the leadership team has access to one pool of information that the layer below doesn't have. So there's already a gap in sort of what people are able to have a conversation about, and then you kind of take that further down the organization. So that's, I think, a big thing culturally. And then ultimately as well, the piece I mentioned about the having everyone know that you need to have data-driven decisions and bring it from that lens. I think people then know what to show up with versus sort of coming with half-baked ideas or half-baked kind of concepts. It is really meant to be more full-fledged, and you take the time in advance to kind of prepare for that. So the meetings are really productive then, because you're starting from a point of kind of a much more complete thought versus, walking in a room and I think this might be what's happening, and then it takes a month and a half for you to come back with with an answer on something. So yeah, it's easy for that, and then decisions are made in the room versus on this in the hallway or in a secret meeting after the meeting kind of thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know you've consulted with a few organizations after Amazon and stuff. How easy or difficult is it to transplant this data culture in terms of getting other companies which have sort of historically run on feelings and historically run on like not everybody seeing the same data? How easy is it to kind of uh, instill this culture where everybody does everything using data and like everybody has the data available to them? You have the insights. What's been your experience of that?
Yeah, honestly, it depends on where the starting point is for where they're at kind of in the organization. So a few things in particular that I found in supporting kind of earlier startups that might not be thinking about what they need long term. It's sort of like they're earlier stage enough that you can kind of make recommendations and help them make sure they've got better structures in place in terms of investing in making sure they have a tool that they can pull reporting, and it's sometimes really simple like that, is making sure their data is easily accessible and it's something that they can kind of build, and that they're building safeguards in that. I think a lot of startups are using kind of open cloud and these things that are high risk of people coming in and grabbing their own data, like really making sure they're understanding that, I think, is depending on the starting point for that. And then organizations are more established. I think a lot of it comes down to it's not necessarily that they don't want to make decisions with data. A lot of times it's just the data has been built in 19 silos. It's in very different states of confidence or accuracy. So the challenge there is more that individual departments are making decisions off of different sets of data, and there's not really a clear source of truth or what good looks like relative to like what would be the best way for us to look at this and framing. And a lot of times what I've seen is people are really hyper focused on the output. So the end revenue number, the EBITDA, the bottom numbers, but don't necessarily understand what input levers go into that could help move, and what are the critical things that what are the five things that affect revenue and what are those things upstream and are we tracking those? So I think part of it just comes in people are using data, but maybe not the same data or the same structure. So it does take a fair bit of time in terms of adapting it. But what I've found is a lot of people are using data. It's just a matter of like, are they actually using the same data, the same kind of language around it, making decisions off the same sets. And that's where you end up making a decision in one siloed department that affects another, and they hadn't known that they were going to affect each other. So I think a lot of it just comes to making sure that you're unified in that piece. And then it's also, a lot of companies are now in this stage where they really want to try AI. They want to try these generative pieces that'll help them move faster in the business. But if the foundations aren't in place and there's not clarity as to why you're using that solution and what it's solving, then you just see a lot of that. People are moving fast on something, but they need to kind of slow down and make sure that the foundations are there. Otherwise, AI could very easily hallucinate, recommend the wrong decisions. It's still nascent in a lot of its uses. So I think I definitely fully supportive of the passion and leaning into making that a great enabler for teams. But the foundational piece is really couldn't be understated enough in terms of why it's important to have those key pieces in place so that it has the optimal chance to make the right calls. The same thing was true for machine learning. The same thing was true for previous, generations of using kind of versions of AI. But yeah, it's sort of this, I think people are excited about it. They just maybe sometimes struggle with the structure and understanding how to connect the dots on it and how to make the
Yeah.
most effective decisions with it.
Yeah. So I think you've spoken about like having the base layer right in order for us to sort of benefit well from AI, for us to be able to make a gradual transformation rather than a one shot. Hey, my board has asked me what I'm doing with AI, so let's do some project on this and things like that. So, but on a broader perspective, how do you see the fields of data analytics, business, and most importantly, given where your background, the interaction with between the data and business teams? How do you see all of these evolving in the face of generative AI? Because what we've been like, you see a lot of this. Should I hire an analyst? I can just ask Claude to sort of analyze my data, or there could be like, oh, now on the other hand, from the analyst side, it's like, hey, instead of just presenting these raw numbers, I can actually present a nice summary. I mean, that's on the good side and so on. So how do you see the field evolving in the face of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be ignorant to not understand that this kind of iterative technology and it will move faster in the next 5 years than the last 5 years of we've seen, or probably the last five generations of technology in terms of what this could transform business and roles in. I think it's two things for me at least. It's the AI is and remains to be a great enabler of people. So it's an enhancement. It's a way to kind of take tasks that might have been not productive and find ways to kind of make that more sustainable or faster. But in that regard, that the critical role that people still play is auditing that. And I think there's still this quick, I put this in and now I'm just going to put it in the deck and not look at it. But if you don't audit it, there's more than likely something in there that it's done wrong. And it's sort of the equivalent of like a teenager right now in terms of its capabilities, in that it's still, it has some playbooks, it has some ideas of what to do, but it can't make multi-million, it shouldn't make multi-million pound decisions unless you have a really solid foundation in place. So I think both business and data analytics, data science teams are, at risk of making those mistakes if there's not that. There should be things that we can use it for, like more efficient code, auditing code to check for errors, building presentation style, because formatting in Excel, nobody wants to spend time doing that. There's things like that it's just those tasks should be something that we use those tools for to make sure our time is being spent doing more valuable things. So I think there's definitely use cases in it, and it should be a great way to do it. It can also do things a lot faster than we can in terms of looking across a lot of really complex sets of things. So there's absolutely use cases for it, but I worry that right now both business leaders and data science, data analytics teams are moving faster in terms of trusting it or thinking it will replace something. And kind of we've seen the trends of a bunch of people getting made redundant because they assume those roles are no longer needed, particularly entry level, earlier stage roles, which is a huge risk for our future talent, right? Because you need those roles to also help them develop for your long-term talent strategies and structures. But they're kind of getting rid of those roles, moving to other models, and then realizing they need the roles back, or they need people in those seats to do it. So this
There's
kind
a
of up down trend. So go ahead.
So there's a company which I think like, they put they I think posted on Twitter saying they have kind of sacked their entire customer support team, saying we have outsourced it to AI. And then a couple of months later, they were like, okay, this is not working. We need to bring all those people back. And that was I don't know if they did it
Yeah.
for a marketing gimmick, but it was a example of what happens if you try to move way too quickly on this one.
Yeah, customer service is a great example of something it probably has been hit the hardest, fastest, because the idea of, oh, you have all these agents kind of solving problems for you. You can automate the 10 most common answers and just kind of to bring that through a chatbot. But you think about how frustrating that experience is for customers, and the risk of if someone's contacting customer service, it's a real issue already, and then you're putting them through a bunch of effort to get there. Forget about them coming back to you as a customer. So I think measuring things like customer effort score, those things are really important because it gives you a frame of that. But sorry, I digress. But in the future kind of state, I think the helpful thing is data science, data engineering, cybersecurity. Like the role of technology teams and the role of data in supporting all those aspects of technology are such a critical juncture right now. And I hope that means that leaders are taking a lot more time to invest in understanding their own structures and spending a lot more time with their data and technical teams, because it is just such a critical piece. And I think particularly for leaders, more people are going to have to build technical fluency, or at least technical understanding, so that they can really make the best decisions. So I'm excited about that opportunity to kind of create more bridges across organizations. And similarly, technical leaders and data science and data engineering is going to have to learn more about the business, because there are ways that you can use agents to move faster on things, but that means it's even more critical that you understand fundamentally what the business is trying to solve for and be on board with the mission and excited about it, for people to kind of stick around. I think the roles are in high demand, so people are, very likely to get offers, particularly data scientists and data engineers at this stage. Like they can hop around if they say they have AI background. You're seeing crazy offers from OpenAI and Facebook and others that are, offering these things. And money is an easy thing to be influenced by, but if people aren't connected to the culture of the business and the team and like what the teams are solving for, then you will see a lot of attrition. And it's a big risk in these spaces to have attrition, because they're hard roles to fill. So I think people really need to invest in making sure that people are happy, but also people are interested and not overloaded, as well. So it's a dichotomy right now where we're at. It's kind of a key juncture, but I hope it creates. I'm not hopeful. I am confident it will create more opportunities for the teams to interact, but it is a responsibility on both sides for teams to kind of really lean in, and better understand both sides of it.
Great. Liz Gebhard, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for coming on Data Chatter Season 2.